that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, I am the Lisan Al-Gaib, the Mahdi, the voice from the outer worlds. I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis, and welcome back to Dune. So, as of this moment, up until I get to the sequels that Frank Herbert's son worked with Kevin J. Anderson on, which is the 2 books that take place after Heretics and Chapter House of Dune. I have read every single prequel book or inter-sequel book by Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert. And so I definitely will be doing a tier list at some point, just for Kevin's and Brian's stuff, because I've gone through all of it. And I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised. I kind of had an expectation going in with Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert's work. I knew it wasn't going to be Frank Herbert's work, so I didn't put on that pedestal, which I think others do, and which is why they say it's complete and utter garbage, which just isn't. You just don't know how to be objective. They're decent works that just pale in comparison to Frank Herbert's work. But anyway, besides all that, here we are. I reached the final one. From here on out, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House Dune, I think is the order. All Frank Herbert, all the original author. That's what I'll be going through next in the Dune universe, which I'm very excited for. As I hear people, a lot of people anyway, not everyone, a lot of people tend to find Leto Atreides II a bit more of an interesting character than Paul Muad'Dib Atreides is, which we'll see how I feel about that as we continue forward. But this is Winds of Dune by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. This book is another inter-sequel, where it takes place after Dune Messiah, but is before Children of Dune. So that's kind of the time framing there. It's like a couple months after the events of Dune Messiah. You know, we get to see how Jessica's reeling with the death of her son. We get to see how Irulan's doing, what Shaddam's still up to, because Shaddam's still around. Or, Gurney. Or Duncan, Idaho, the Gula, and Stilgar, and we get to see all that stuff. In between that, also, the same thing that Paul of Dune did, which is we also had half the book being a prequel book that took place after the Houses trilogy. And it's the same thing here. This deals with a friend that Paul had in the past, when Paul was still a teenager, before the events of Dune, obviously. And then it is interlaced with the main plot, though. I think a bit better than Paul of Dune, or it wasn't. The thing with Paul of Dune was the War of Assassins storyline really had nothing to do with the current day plot outside of a character that was just introduced in that book, which I guess is the same thing here. But outside of that, it was pretty. The only other thing it did was really kind of harpen more on the difference between Duke Leto Atreides and Duke Muad'Dib Paul Atreides, and the difference between the two men. The things that Leto would do, or would be willing to do, or would not be willing to do, as opposed to what Paul would be willing to do. And even then, Paul has his limits, whereas I hear his son will not. There were a lot of interesting sections to Winds of Dune. I will admit, there is a good portion of it where I was kind of like, come on. Like, I was just so... I was bored, and I was just kind of flipping through because, like, I gotta do the review. But I was not having fun, in portions of it. So it is a big negative for the book, I think. But also, boredom is subjective. But I do think there's just... the writing is a bit dull in sections, so I'm not particularly a fan of that. But I think it's decent. I think, in my opinion anyway, the most recent trilogy that they did together, um, the Duke of Caladan, Lady of Caladan, and Heir to Caladan, I think is by far the weakest things that Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert worked on. I don't think they're absolutely abysmal. I just think it was completely unnecessary and drags and meanders a lot. Now, Winds of Dune is a single book, and since I have not read Children of Dune, it makes me interested in that story. Do I think you'll enjoy this as much? I mean, I think it's okay. But if you've read Children of Dune already, I don't know if you'll enjoy this because it doesn't really, because of the time placement, nothing can really change because all the stuff that's important is going to happen in the next book. Like Paul's children they're not even a factor in this story because it takes place like 2 months after. They're newborns, so like it has nothing to do with them. At the same time, it is nice to get these little snippets of character moments to see how Jessica's dealing with her grief of her son, or how other people deal with the death of Moadib or Paul Atreides. But ultimately, it just made me curious and intrigued to see what happens next. Which, of course, anyone that's been a fan of Dune for a long time would have already they have that answer. They've read Children of Dune, whereas I'm going through this for the first time. So for me, it's just made me more intrigued. I do think there's merits to this book. I think the new character they introduce, Bronsko, who is like a friend of Paul back in the day, his whole thing in the present day storyline is that he's writing manifestos that demystify and Paul, making him be as he was, which was just a man. And Alia really doesn't like that, and that's a big thing we start to see here. And I know I don't know a complete context or understanding of the Children of Doom plot. In fact, most of it is a mystery to me. But one thing I have been spoiled on is particularly Alia's direction as a character and some of the twists and turns that happen with her. And here, she is still not a hero, but she's still like the family member. She still, loves Paul, loves her family. She still has that redeeming quality, but there's clearly an undercurrent of radicalism and a, a bit more of a darker tone than Paul, because at least in my interpretation of Paul, he's doing these things because he saw it, that this was the way to the golden path, which isn't going to be really talked about till Children of Dune, the whole golden path thing, but that's what he was doing it for. He you could feel like he allowed a lot of stuff to happen, but he didn't necessarily enjoy any of it. It was just like it was necessary for some greater goal. And that's something I particularly enjoy doing. And I don't know if Elia enjoys it, but she is certainly more willing to do certain things and to act a certain way, which I feel like even Paul was a bit hesitant to do. So we're clearly heading in a direction with her character. But overall, it was okay. It is not the best thing by any means. I will still fight with tooth and nail to this day that the Butlerian Jihad trilogy and the Schools of Dune trilogy are the best things that Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson worked on together. In fact, I would argue that they are on par with. It's not the same sort of writing, but I still feel they would be on par with um, at least with some of Frank's work. Maybe even better than, I haven't read them yet, so I can't speak on this, but maybe even better than Heretics and Chapter House, which I hear a bit more divisive among fans. Um, House of Dune trilogy, which deals with young Leto and everything, the first, Paul's father. I enjoyed them, but they are very much what I was expecting from a Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert collaboration, I should say. And I already mentioned the Caladan trilogy, and I've said this a couple times now in my reviews, but I would place this above the Of Caladan trilogy. Um, it's not better than Paul of Dune. I like Paul of Dune a lot. Um, so it's one of the weaker ones that they've worked on, but by no means absolutely horrid. But definitely not essential if you just want the next story after Dune Messiah. Go straight into Children. You don't need this. But if you just want an additional story set in this setting, There are worse books you could read. So, do I recommend it? No, not necessarily, unless you're a completionist, like I am. But it is there if you want it, and if you have read it, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. I know Matt Bolkins has, and this is like his least favorite um, Dune book. So, anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to get into spoilers now. If you don't want that, now's your time to leave. If you don't care about spoilers, stick around. So, it is really great that this book really focuses on the woman of Dune. Not that that's like super important that you have to do that, but we get Jessica, we get Alia, uh, we get Irulan sections, so it's just nice to see their perspectives and stuff. It is interesting too, as we get to see how Gurney mourns, Paul's death, and he, is weeping and crying and just a mess in the beginning. Um, his young pup is gone, but for Jessica, she wants to cry, but she's unable to do so. And seeing Gurney be able to express that makes her feel guilty. And that was just like, again, do you need that to understand Children of Dune? Do you need that to, for anything in the Dune universe? Ultimately, no, but it is a nice little intimate moment there that I appreciated and I thought was done well. So I get to see Shaddam, and he's still, to this day, it's been, 12 years or 17 years since the events of Dune, and he still wants to take back Arrakis. He still wants to become the Emperor of the known universe yet again. Bro, you're like adding toward like 80 now. Like, it's time to give up. Um, but he's still going for it. He's still trying. Fenring despises him. He just doesn't care anymore. He just thinks of Shaddam as a tool. And another thing, again, I have to reiterate, there's barely any Fenring in here, but I love Count Fenring. And maybe he's a bigger character in Children of Dune. That's the only place where he could be, because by God Emperor, it's 1,000 years later, so they're all going to be dead anyway. But, or hundreds of thousands, I don't even know how long it is, but it's a long time. But Children of Dune is the only place where he could really be a big character now. So if they don't do it then he never will be. But Kevin Janderson and Brian Herbert have really made me love the character. So, him and his wife, Lady Fenring, which, one thing I didn't like, of course, I'm like, where do you even place it in, like, a 4-hour movie, technically, if you're counting part 1 and part 2, but there's just no Hasmir. Like, he just doesn't exist. And to be fair, I guess he doesn't really matter to the original plot. So that's completely fair. Like, again, there's a lot of things in the original Dune novel which are just ultimately kind of pointless and unnecessary. Hasmir doesn't need to be in it. He doesn't add or subtract anything from the story. Maybe, in the additional material that I've read, yeah, but not in the original novel, outside of world building. Um, but I love Hasmir, and that's mainly due to these two authors, so I appreciate that a lot. This is pretty epic. Stilgar just stabs Mother Mohayim to death. So that was pretty crazy. She tries to use the voice on him, and he lunges at her to make sure she doesn't. Well, she's got stuff on her mouth, but she like breaks her she breaks her hand so she can unslip her cuffs, and then so she can try to pull down the thing, gag in her mouth, But he just rushes in and quickly dead. So it was crazy. It's probably the highlight of the whole book for me, just because like I was not expecting that, and to have Stilgar, who's my boy, do that too, was phenomenal. Because I hate that lady anyway. She's like the worst. So, or in Dune, who's really the worst. Everybody sucks, but I'm glad she's gone, and that I was like, yeah, let's go. So that was like probably my favorite moment from this book. Um, Gurney and Duncan also have a really little interesting talk to each other, where Gurney's reminiscing and he doesn't know if he can trust Duncan because he is a ghoul after all. The other characters in Dune Messiah might have, but we didn't really see how Gurney felt about it, and they get into a little scuffle, a little fight, and Duncan's like, then do it. If you truly believe you can't trust me, that I'm not your friend like I have always been, then stab me right now. Do it. And Gurney doesn't. So it's just a nice little interesting moment between the two. And I love little character moments and, just emotional, bonding and sort of things. I'm very much a character person first. Like, give me like two characters talking about life and, you know, um, show me more of who they are through intimate little conversation. I live for that. Um, and so it was done pretty decently, and I enjoyed it. It was a nice little conversation. Another thing too is with Bronsko being this counter that's coming in, saying all this stuff about Muad'Dib, how he's not a god. Da, 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 da. Elia propositions Irulan to only write propaganda now. Before, Paul was like, yes, rise me up, but also try to keep me somewhat humble, like keep the truth of me while expanding the myth. It was interesting how Dune Messiah and even Paul of Dune kind of discussed that. But Elia just wants propaganda. Like, no, just prop up Paul as the greatest thing ever. Just do that. So that was interesting. And I don't, the weakest section of this book is the prequel stuff. Bronsko and Paul's relationship is fine. I've heard some friends express dissatisfaction that Paul has ever left Caladan before Dune. I mean, if that's the biggest contradiction, I mean, I think we're okay. Considering I love the Star Wars Expanded Universe, there's been bigger contradictions than that, and it's been patched. Um, it doesn't bother me that much. Maybe it'll bother you more. He goes off planet again, uh, because Rombar, who's the father of Bronsko, we actually met him in the Houses trilogy, and he's got like a robot arm and stuff. They live on IX. They're the Ixian, so they're Ixians. So if you hate that, that happens again. But him and his relationship with Bronsko's fine. There's a little bit of interesting stuff there, but this mainly because I already care about Rombar from the Houses trilogy. If you don't like the Houses trilogy, or you haven't read the Houses trilogy, then you're not going to really care about this whole plot thread. But since I did, I did at least, I cared about Rombar already, so the little family drama between him and Bronsko, I did enjoy a little bit. But overall, like, Paul, Bronsko learns that he's not the blood son of Rombar because after stuff that happens in the House trilogy, he just couldn't have kids. So his wife was artificially inseminated. So he's not really his father, but he also brings the point like, no, I'm your father because I raised you, I took care of you. You're my son. Which is, we've seen this like everywhere in stories, but still, but Bronsko runs off. And Paul goes with him because he's like, my dad said to make sure you were okay, so I have to come with you. I'm honor bound to. I kind of like that. But then they just kind of like, they go to a circus, which I mean, kind of cool, I guess. It's a bunch of face dancers, which is also interesting, I suppose, in terms of world building. But like, it's also just not that interesting. I mean, to be fair, I will say, you know, everything that happens in Doom, yes, was essential for how Paul ends up becoming at the same time. How did Paul become who he is up until Doom? You know, because most of the skills that he has to become the Muad'Dib he already had. The things he learned, with a Fremen was how to fight like a Fremen, how to speak like a Fremen, how to think like a Fremen, and how to ride sandworms. But everything else he kind of already had. He had the voice, he had all this stuff, you know. So with the circus, he kind of learns not to manipulate, but how to stir a crowd, how to get them, you know, riled up, how to get them excited, how to get to do this and this, and then that's important for rule. Jessica makes that point when Leto's mad at him for or whatever. So I did kind of like that in that aspect. That okay, sure, he did that for a little bit in his circus, which is silly, but at the same time, it is he used that experience to help him in Dune, in terms of one of the skill sets he acquired was, how to move a crowd, how to, maneuver through that and use people's emotions to better, um, so I like that. That was fine. We also get a little bit of sections in here, which are 2 years after Paul of Dune. This is a little confusing. Before Dune Messiah still, but 2 years after Paul of Dune, the book ends. This is where we have Irulan, Chani when she was still alive, and Jessica go to Seleucus Secundus, and they visit Shaddam. And, Shaddam's like, I should be in charge of the Empire. Now that Paul is dead. Cowbells. But it was a good section. And it teases that he may be one of the factions vying for control in Children of Dune. If it is, I'm going to give negative point. I'm going to put negative points here, too. But I will give negative points to Frank Herbert if Shaddam is shenaniganing anything in Children of Dune. Like, he should be irrelevant. To include him, I find extremely stupid. I don't know if they're actually going to, but they tease at the end of this book because Irulan gets a letter from her father saying, like, where does your true loyalty lie? Which, at this point, I think Irulan's true loyalty lies to a dead man. But, regardless of all that, he clearly still wants to be in charge, and he's still kicking and still willing to do stuff. So, we'll see what happens in Children of Dune when I get there. But I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know if I want to see Shaddam as an old man trying to regain. Like, who cares? Who cares about Shaddam? No one. So stop. Like, he had his time to shine. It was the House trilogy. Leave it alone. Um, and then, yes, of course, at the end, Bronsko has to die. Now, part of the thing, too, is that we learn that Paul asked him to do this. Paul didn't like all this messianic stuff being told about him, and he wanted a counter for the history. He asked implicitly that Bronsko, write him in a more truthful light. Um, so Bronsko did. But of course, Elia is getting a bit more bloodthirsty. So at the end of the book, Bronsko has to die. And there's another good scene between him and Jessica when he's like in his jail cell, where she offers him the gum Jabbar. She's like, "Look, you've been slandering my son. Of course, I now know that's what my son wanted. But, if I kill you now, it'll be quick, mostly painless, and, I'll be okay, because grief-stricken mother, upset, they won't even question the fact that I did this. They'll forgive me, and you don't have to suffer." But he's like, "No, it's important. I'll be a bit more of a martyr now. More people critique Muad'Dib and that if I die this way." So he allows himself to be, more publicly and more painfully executed, as Elia wants. So, or Alia or whatever. But at the same time, despite the gears that are turning for her character, she still gives Jessica, before she departs for Caladan, um, Leto Atreides' ducal signet ring. This is my father's ducal signet. I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. But that ring. And she gives it back to her mother, and despite her mother having dealt with Paul's death and kind of seeing some hints of not so great stuff with Elia, that's still her daughter, and she still loves her. She appreciates the gift. Elia smiles, and she departs. So, even amidst the obvious turning points that are going on for Elia's character, as we'll see only be strengthened in the next story, at least there's that nice moment. Oh, and not Gurney, Duncan, the Gula. I'm just going to say Duncan from now on at this point. It's just Duncan. And Alia do get married in this book, so we get to see that. So that's pretty cool, I guess. And there's some other details I'm missing, but overall it's the gist. And like I said, I enjoyed it. It is definitely one of the weaker ones, but as opposed to a 3-novel trilogy that was not that great after the first one, this is only one read, one book. So, again, I don't recommend it, but I mean, I don't recommend it not in the sense that you shouldn't read it, but just, There's other books you can read that are better. But if you want something more in the Dune universe, if you just love this universe and you want another story, this is a decent one. I think there's definitely some interesting stuff brought in for this being an in-between story. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it a ton, and don't forget to walk with rhythm or get eaten by a sandworm. Till next time.